Welcome to the deep dive. Imagine a society where judges are, legally forbidden from favoring the poor.
Or where farmers are actually mandated to leave a percentage of their profits on the ground.
Exactly. And where getting the wrong haircut could,
Mm.
well, it could literally get you exiled from the community.
It sounds completely wild to our modern ears.
It really does. But before we unpack all that, I want to take a brief moment to offer a blessing for you as you listen today. May your day be filled with peace, and may the week ahead bring you clarity, purpose, and abundant grace in whatever you are facing right now.
That's a wonderful way to start off today.
Thanks. So we are pulling from some incredibly detailed source material today, specifically the translated study notes from both the Holman and the NAA Study Bibles. Our mission is to examine a text that, most people just dismiss as dusty, irrelevant ancient history.
Right, Leviticus chapter 19.
Yeah. And it turns out this isn't just some list of obscure rituals. We're looking at a highly sophisticated street-level blueprint for structuring a society.
The contrast between our modern assumptions about Leviticus and what's actually in the text it's staggering. The popular conception is that this book is merely a manual for ancient priests operating in a cloud of incense.
Yeah, totally. Like very detached from real life.
Exactly. But as the study notes reveal, chapter 19 is remarkably grounded. It addresses agricultural welfare, labor rights, judicial impartiality, and commercial integrity.
Which is a lot to cover.
It is. But to understand the mechanics of these laws, we really have to grasp the foundational command that anchors the entire chapter. The text opens with a directive from God to the people: "Be holy, because I, the Lord your God, am holy."
Okay, so the word holiness,
Mm-hmm.
it carries an enormous amount of baggage for modern listeners. We tend to associate it with, a monk meditating on a mountain.
Yeah, or perhaps a feeling of pious, quiet reverence.
Right. It sounds like an internal, completely passive state of mind.
Sure. Well, the NWA study notes are essential here for stripping away that modern baggage. In the original context, the term translated as holiness does not denote a vague spiritual feeling whatsoever.
Wait, really? Then what does it mean?
The literal meaning is to be separated, unique, and distinct. It is fundamentally about imitating the nature of the divine through tangible, everyday human action.
Oh, wow. So it's very active.
Very active. It is a lived-out reality that requires an active differentiation from the surrounding cultures.
So it functions almost like a radical brand identity or a totalizing corporate culture.
Mm-hmm.
If you belong to this community, you don't just adopt the founder's values while you're in the building,
Right, your entire lifestyle has to reflect it.
Down to the granular details, yeah.
Yeah.
And the text wastes no time demonstrating how disruptive this identity is meant to be. The very first specific command addresses family dynamics, telling the people to revere their parents. But it explicitly lists the mother before the father.
And the Holman Bibles point out how jarring that phrasing would be to the original audience. The ancient Near East was strictly patriarchal. Women, both legally and socially, were generally subordinated to male heads of households.
So flipping that is a huge deal.
It is a massive deal. Reversing that expected order, elevating the mother's status right out of the gate, signals immediately that this concept of holiness involves dismantling the prevailing cultural norms. It establishes a completely unique baseline for how human beings are valued within this specific community.
That sets up a fascinating trajectory, really. If holiness requires living distinctly from the surrounding patriarchal empires, that distinctness has to materialize in the broader economy, which, brings us to the fields.
Yes, the gleaning laws.
Right. The text outlines these gleaning laws. Landowners are commanded not to harvest the very edges of their fields. Furthermore, if they are picking grapes and some fall to the ground, they are explicitly forbidden from going back to pick them up.
Which goes against every business instinct we have today.
Totally. They have to leave that unharvested produce for the poor and the foreigner.
The economic implications of this are just profound. The underlying theology, as highlighted by the sources, is that God is the true owner of the land.
Yeah.
So the human landowners are essentially just tenants or stewards. Because the divine owner provides the land's bounty, the community has a structural legal obligation to ensure that the vulnerable, the poor, the traveling laborer, the immigrant have access to a portion of that provision.
It's basically institutionalized access to resources.
Exactly.
But I have to push back on the logic of this system a little bit. If the foundational premise is that God is the ultimate owner of the land, why allow wealthy landowners to exist in the first place?
That's a fair question.
Right, like why wouldn't a truly holy text just mandate an equal distribution of property rather than relying on this gleaning loophole where the poor are forced to, like, walk behind the wealthy and pick up their scraps?
Well, that is a critical question about the mechanics of ancient welfare. The study notes indicate that this system is designed to preserve human dignity rather than just functioning as a handout.
Oh, interesting. How so?
A purely redistributive model, or a system of passive charity, can strip the vulnerable of their agency. In the gleaning system, the poor still have to go into the field and perform the labor of harvesting.
I see. So they are working for it.
Exactly. They are working for their sustenance, which maintains their dignity and participation in the economy. Simultaneously, the landowner is legally barred from extracting 100% of the profit from their own property.
Right.
It creates an economic safety net that balances the necessity of labor with a strict limitation on hoarding.
That distinction between dignity and passive charity is crucial, honestly. It changes the dynamic from a wealthy person benevolently handing down food to a vulnerable person having a legal right to access the resources of the land through their own effort.
Yes, and the text doesn't stop at agriculture either. It moves straight into fair labor practices.
Yeah. Oh, right. The rule about paying people. There is a mandate that a day laborer must be paid their wages before morning. You cannot withhold what someone has earned overnight, recognizing that day laborers survive on, well, immediate cash flow.
Right. We tend to think of labor rights and wealth redistribution as modern socioeconomic debates. But the text strictly bans oppression, stealing, and lying within these economic relationships.
It's laying out a safety net centuries ago.
It really is. It builds a society where economic interactions are governed by a moral framework, not just market forces. But for those economic rules to hold any weight, the judicial system enforcing them has to be equally distinct.
Because you cannot maintain a holy economy if the courts are easily corrupted by wealth or status,
Exactly.
which introduces the judicial laws of the chapter. And some of these are incredibly specific regarding the vulnerable. Like there's a command not to curse a deaf person and another forbidding placing a stumbling block in front of a blind person.
Which, on the surface, just sounds like basic human decency.
Yeah, just don't be awful to people.
Ah.
But there is a mechanical layer to these specific examples that is much deeper.
The key to those commands is the rationale provided by the text. You must do this out of the fear of God.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Consider the mechanics of the crime. If you curse a deaf person, they cannot hear you. If you place a trap in front of a blind person, they cannot see who laid it. In an ancient society without forensic evidence, you could execute those offenses with zero societal consequences.
Right, because there are no capable witnesses.
Exactly. By inserting the fear of God, the text installs a framework of divine surveillance. It asserts that true justice and integrity must govern the interactions that happen entirely in the shadows, where the victim is unaware and society isn't looking.
Wow. It demands an internal moral compass that doesn't rely on the threat of the local police force. And when offenses do end up in the public courts, the standard of impartiality is rigorously defined too,
Yes, judges are commanded not to show favoritism to the rich.
which is a standard anti-corruption law we would expect. But the text also explicitly forbids showing favoritism to the poor.
That dual prohibition ensures that justice is entirely blind to social status. Sympathy for a defendant's lack of resources cannot alter the interpretation of the law, just as a wealthy defendant's influence cannot buy a verdict.
The law must function as an objective standard.
Precisely.
The sources highlight a specific, highly complex legal case in the text that shows how this ancient system attempted to navigate nuance and social status. It is the law regarding a man who sleeps with a slave woman who is promised to another man.
Right, a very difficult text for modern readers.
Yeah, for a modern reader, encountering laws regulating slavery and sexual conduct in the same breath is jarring. How do the study notes unpack the legal mechanics of this ruling?
The study notes provide vital context regarding ancient property and social agency. In the broader ancient Near East, a slave was viewed almost exclusively as property. If a slave woman was caught in adultery, she would typically bear the absolute brunt of the punishment, often execution.
Because she was considered damaged property.
Exactly. But this biblical text introduces a radical nuance. It recognizes that because the woman is a slave, she lacks the economic and social agency to refuse the man.
All right.
Her vulnerability negates her culpability in a way that a free woman's status would not. Therefore, the law explicitly spares her from the death penalty.
So it acknowledges power dynamics. The law shields the person who lacks the power to consent or resist, while still requiring a guilt offering and punishment to address the moral breach committed by the man who exploited the situation.
Precisely. It is a legal system actively wrestling with the realities of vulnerability, consent, and societal status. And this intricate web of judicial and economic laws culminates in what the sources identify as the climax of relational law.
Love your neighbor as yourself.
Yes, the cornerstone of the text. Both the Holman and NAA study Bibles flag this as the fundamental principle of the Torah.
And it establishes massive continuity with the New Testament, right?
Yeah.
Because this is the exact phrase later elevated by Jesus and the Apostle Paul.
Absolutely.
It is the ultimate preventative measure against a fractured society. You will not hold grudges, seek revenge, or exploit your laborers if you are actively applying that standard.
It acts as the theological glue holding all the previous laws together.
But, this is where the narrative tension of the chapter sort of snaps. We have just walked through this highly rational, socioeconomically nuanced legal code regarding land ownership, power dynamics, and judicial impartiality.
Yeah, it all makes logical sense.
Right. We have established that these lawmakers are deeply concerned with structural fairness. So why, in the very next breath, do they suddenly care if a farmer plants two different kinds of seeds in the same dirt?
It's a sharp term.
Or why do they care if someone's shirt is woven from a blend of wool and linen? Is this just an ancient fashion crime? Or is something deeper happening here?
The sudden shift to the mixing laws is definitely jarring, but the NAA notes provide an excellent framework for decoding them. It's the concept of ceremonial exigency.
Okay, break down the mechanics of ceremonial exigency for us. Is this an ancient agricultural taboo or something else entirely?
It is entirely symbolic. These laws serve as pervasive object lessons. If we return to the foundational concept that Israel is called to be a holy, separated, and distinct nation, that abstract theological concept needs constant reinforcement.
So it's about staying distinct.
Yes. The mixing laws ensure that their everyday physical environment reflects that spiritual separation. By forbidding the mixing of animal breeds, the blending of seeds in a single field, and the interweaving of different fabrics, the law dictates that everything must remain in its distinct, God-ordained sphere.
Let's apply that corporate identity analogy from earlier. It is akin to working for a highly secretive, distinct tech company, let's say Apple, and being forbidden from wearing a jacket that features both the Apple logo and a Microsoft logo.
That's a great way to put it. You don't blur the lines.
Right. Every time an ancient Israelite looked at the unmixed crops in their field or felt the single material fabric on their skin, they were experiencing a tactile reminder of their own required separation from the surrounding nations.
It utilizes the physical world to train human psychology. And we see this training extended into the agricultural cycle for new fruit trees, too.
Oh, the fruit tree cycle, yeah.
The text outlines a fascinating mandate. When a new tree is planted, its fruit is considered forbidden or uncircumcised for the first 3 years. In the 4th year, the harvest is designated as holy and offered entirely to the Lord. It is only in the 5th year that the farmer is permitted to eat the fruit themselves.
That is a staggering exercise in delayed gratification. What is the mechanism behind forcing a farmer to wait 5 years to consume the product of their own labor?
Well, it ties directly back to the theology of the gleaning laws. It reinforces the hierarchy of ownership. By forcing the farmer to pause, to leave the fruit untouched, and then to dedicate the first usable harvest to God, the law prevents the human impulse to immediately consume and exploit the earth.
It keeps them grounded.
Exactly. It trains the population to continually acknowledge that God is the true owner of the land and the ultimate source of its abundance.
Now, this intense obsession with physical and psychological separation, this constant need to remind the Israelites of who they are, it really only makes logical sense when we examine what they were actively trying to avoid becoming.
Right. The surrounding pagan nations.
Yeah, the text shifts into a hard boundary line against the specific practices of the Canaanite nations.
The prohibitions become rapid fire and absolute. No eating meat with the blood still in it, no divination, no practicing magic, and absolutely no turning to mediums or necromancers to consult the dead.
We tend to read those as spooky fantasy novel tropes. But in the ancient Near East, what function were divination and necromancy actually serving in society?
They were the core religious mechanisms of the surrounding empires. Divination and consulting the dead were essentially ancient technologies used to manipulate the gods, secure a favorable future outcome, or bypass divine sovereignty entirely.
Sort of like ancient life hacks.
Exactly. So by strictly banning these practices, the Israelites were being forced into a posture of absolute reliance. They had to trust the covenant and God's sovereignty for their future, rather than seeking occult workarounds to guarantee their own security.
That historical context completely changes how we should read the next set of rules. The chapter contains the famous prohibitions against cutting the edges of the beard and getting tattoos.
Yes, very famous verses.
For decades, this has been debated as the ultimate biblical ban on modern body art. So, is this the ultimate biblical ban on body art? Surely the lawmakers weren't just concerned with ancient aesthetics, right?
They were not. The study notes clarified that these prohibitions had nothing to do with personal style. In the ancient Canaanite context, gashing the flesh, shaving the temples, and getting specific tattooed markings were deeply ingrained ritualistic customs.
Linked to what, exactly?
They were directly linked to mourning cults for the dead and participating in idolatrous ceremonies. The body was literally utilized as a canvas for the occult.
So getting a tattoo or that specific haircut in that era wasn't a fashion statement. It was the equivalent of wearing the uniform of a rival, death-centric religion.
Exactly.
By banning those specific modifications, the text is commanding the Israelites to honor the human body as a distinct creation, while actively rejecting the surrounding culture's attempts to contact spirits through physical mutilation.
It is about maintaining that holy identity against immense, pervasive cultural pressure.
Now, if a society erects this kind of intense physical and spiritual barrier against foreign nations, literally commanding its people not to look like them, farm like them, or worship like them, the logical next step for any ancient civilization would be extreme xenophobia.
You would expect the very next line in the text to mandate closed borders, right? Build a wall and keep the foreigners out.
Yes, exactly. Yet the text pivots radically in the opposite direction, delivering perhaps the most profound mandate in the entire chapter.
It really is a powerful twist.
The command is explicitly clear. Do not oppress the foreigner living in your land. Treat them as native-born and love them as yourself. It takes that high watermark of relational law, loving your neighbor, and extends it directly to the outsider.
And the rationale the text provides for this empathy is brilliant. It commands them to love the foreigner because you were foreigners in Egypt.
Which is the ultimate exercise in institutional memory. The psychological mechanism here is profound. The moment a civilization forgets its own history of trauma and oppression, it inevitably builds the exact same oppressive systems it once escaped.
It's a very human flaw.
Right. So the text forces the community to constantly look backward at their own vulnerability as immigrants in Egypt, so that they cannot mathematically justify becoming the oppressor to the next vulnerable arrival.
Yeah.
It's a built-in empathy engine.
It is a remarkable safeguard against systemic cruelty, and it is entirely fitting that after these soaring, complex mandates regarding institutional memory and radical empathy, the chapter closes by returning to the dirt.
Oh, back to everyday practicalities.
Yes. It brings the focus right back to the marketplace, insisting on the maintenance of honest scales, honest weights, and honest measures.
It grounds the abstract theology in the physical reality of the market. How you weigh out flour for a customer is an exact, measurable reflection of your obedience to the divine.
True holiness, as defined by this chapter, permeates all commercial transactions. It's inescapable. It touches every single interaction, whether it is with a judge, a laborer, an immigrant, or a customer.
When we pull all of these threads together, the study notes reveal that ancient holiness wasn't about retreating to a mountaintop to meditate. It was a fiercely practical, boots-on-the-ground lifestyle.
A comprehensive system, really.
Yes, one that dictated how you farmed, how you paid your employees, how you treated the vulnerable, and how you remembered your past.
It is a vision for a society where justice and distinctiveness are woven into the very fabric of daily life.
And that leaves you with a final, provocative thought to mull over today. In our modern world, we often compartmentalize our lives, treating spirituality as a purely private, internal feeling that has very little bearing on our professional or economic decisions. But if we applied the Leviticus 19 standard today, what would a truly holy business plan or holy approach to a courtroom actually look like? It challenges the very definition of what it means to live a spiritual life in the public square. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the source material. God blesses all the listeners.